there. Did everyone get the email the other day with the video link and the practice test? Yes? Okay. So like I said last week, practice is important, right? You wouldn't go, Bartu and I were just talking about basketball. Coach is not going to play you if you're not showing up at practice. You wouldn't show up at like a tennis meet or something without having practiced. And we want to treat the SAT pretty much the same way. It's nice in a way that you get the PSAT. Obviously, you want to do as well as possible. It's nice to try to make, the national merit lists and everything else like that. But really, the best thing to use it for is an opportunity to concentrate, to have that experience of sitting there for 3.5 hours and taking the test, and then to take that into, of course, the actual SAT. So again, Bartu and I were just talking about this. Carly and Hannah, do y'all know if you're signed up for either the November or December SAT?
I think I'm taking
Hannah?
ACT October 2nd, but not the SAT.
ACT October 2nd, so like a week, like 10 days from today, basically?
No, it's October 23rd or something.
Okay.
It's just like, see if I like that better or not.
Yeah, makes sense. Hannah, what about you?
Well, I'm taking the pre-ACT on Friday.
Yes. Wait, which are you at TCA? Oh, okay, yeah, because I've got a few other students who are at TCA and they mentioned the pre-ACT coming this Friday.
And then I'm taking the SAT in December.
Perfect, yes. So Carly, you may just want to check out, I think it's great to take that ACT and like you said, just get a sense of your personal preferences. As we discussed back in our first session, I would say for 90% of students these days, there's really no significant difference between their scores on the SAT and the ACT. And that's because the tests themselves have become so similar over time. But that still leaves, roughly 1 in 10 students who might have a very different experience. And even if it's not your score that's super different between the two tests, it may just be that you personally prefer one. And being that you're going to spend several hours on a Saturday doing this, you'd rather take the one that you enjoy somewhat more rather than the other. But yeah, I would just recommend, Carly, make sure you are signed up for either an SAT or an ACT. I mean, I guess, again, you said it was ACT October 23rd. So you're right in that sweet spot. If we're getting ready for that October 13th test, we just want to make sure that we're keeping those skills sharp and then applying them as quickly as possible on either a late October, November, or December test. So it sounds like each of you is set in that arena. Okay, reminder where we left off. Hopefully you can see my screen there. We were looking at the writing section. And speaking of the ACT, Hannah will see this on Friday, and Carly, you'll obviously see it when you take the ACT. The ACT grammar, which they call the English test, on the SAT it's called the writing test, even though you don't actually do any writing. They are identical. They're structured exactly the same way. The only difference is in the number of questions per passage. On the SAT, we always have 11 questions per passage, and we have 4 of those. On the ACT, there are 15 questions per passage, and there are 5 of them. So it's a little longer, and you also have a little bit more time. You have 45 minutes on the ACT. But in terms of the actual content, the grammar, the way they structure the content with like underlining of something in a passage and then answer choices, all of that is precisely the same. So everything we're doing here, Carly, for the SAT would apply just as much on the ACT. And Hannah, for Friday, same exact thing. Everything we're doing on this writing lesson, you can take directly into the pre-ACT on Friday. So to pick up where we left off, grammar obviously is a big subject. There's lots of stuff they could be testing. And even when you like look over practice tests and try to narrow in, you might say, oh, well, there are only like 40 topics that they cover. Well, that's still a ton of stuff to know, right? And so we need some way to focus on any given question. And the way that we've chosen is this question: what's changing in the answer choices? Because every time we answer that question, we know what they're testing. This lesson that we were in the middle of when we left off last time is punctuation, because basically for all these questions, what you're going to notice is that it's the punctuation changing between the answer choices. For example, I'll just go down my little list here. Bar 2, what do you notice changing on these answer choices for number 5?
Comma placement.
Yeah, you've got a comma and then nothing between capitalization and no punctuation, comma and no punctuation, comma and comma, no punctuation. And then obviously in the actual underlined portion, you can see there's no comma whatsoever. Well, clearly, I mean, we can even be more specific, and I think part 2 was, it's not just that they're changing the punctuation here, but specifically, all they're changing is comma placement. And so basically, we want to think through different rules for when we might actually want to use a comma. Now, 2 of these we've already considered. You know, we had this list up here of what we called stop punctuation versus go punctuation. If we had 2 complete ideas or 2 independent clauses, we can use a comma under certain circumstances. We needed a comma plus what we call the fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. But if we have that comma plus one of the fanboys, that can separate 2 complete ideas. Obviously, it's also possible for commas to separate incomplete ideas, or what we call dependent clauses. And so those are 2 reasons we can already know that we can use commas. What I want to discuss now are a few of the other common reasons we can use commas on the SAT and the ACT. And the first one is right here. We want what's called the serial or Oxford comma. I don't know why I wrote a Q, Oxford comma on the SAT. There is some measure of controversy in the English grammar world about the Oxford comma. Some people really, really like it. Some people do not. Some people feel like it kind of upsets the flow of ideas, and so they don't like all those additional pauses. But as far as the SAT is concerned, this is very, very good. They want you to put a comma after every item in a list. So for example, in this question here, or the sentence, it says this: as a result, most books prior to the 1400s were written in scriptura continua, which had no spaces, no capitalization, and no punctuation marks. So you can probably tell this is a list of 3 things, right? We've got no spaces, no capitalization, and no punctuation marks. Carly, do we have a comma after every item in that list right now?
No.
No. And so the first thing I'm going to do is cross off answer choice A. Now, all of B, C, and D add in a comma, but B gets rid of and. And for the final item in our list, we do want to connect it with comma and. And so B is no good. C obviously does the comma and. And then D, you might remember I mentioned this last time, pretty much anytime you see and comma, it's bad. So almost every time we see and comma, we're going to cross that off. And so obviously in this case, C ends up being the best answer choice. So if we see that they're changing commas, this is the process we go through. Am I connecting 2 complete ideas, and do I have a fanboy? Am I connecting incomplete ideas? Am I using items in a list and I want to separate them out with commas? And a couple more rules we'll look at in a second. But basically, if I go through my list and none of them apply, I should not be using a comma. If one of them applies, obviously, then yes, I should use the comma. But that's something I want to think through every time I notice that they're changing the commas in the answer choices. Like number 6 here, you can see we've got the comma after however in the underlined portion, and then B has no comma at all. C has a comma before say, and then D has a comma after say, and then D has a comma after say and after however. The rule we want to look at here is what we call before and after unnecessary information. In this case, you almost want to think of the commas like parentheses. If there's a piece of information that's not necessary to the sentence, meaning we could read the sentence without it and it does not change the meaning, we don't really need that phrase or that word. And so we almost separate it off with a comma before the phrase or the word and a comma after the phrase or the word. In this case, you can probably tell the commas are changing around the word however, and so that's the word where we are going to investigate and try and figure out, do we need this word at all? So actually, here's what I want you to do. Hannah, would you read this sentence, but I don't want you to read the word however. Just read the sentence without however.
This is not to say that there was no punctuation for this time.
So Hannah read that very smoothly. Did we lose any meaning by getting rid of the word however? No, we did not. And what that tells me, it doesn't mean, oh, we shouldn't use the word at all. You can see all the choices have the word however, but it tells me that the word is unnecessary. And so I need a comma before, like an open parentheses, and a comma after, like a closed parentheses. Well, obviously, which answer choice has both of those commas?
D.
That's exactly right. And so I'm going to get rid of A, which only had one of the parentheses. I'm going to get rid of B, which had nothing. I'm going to get rid of C, and I'm going to circle answer choice D. So again, if I notice particularly that they're changing commas around a certain word or phrase, I want to investigate whether that word or phrase is necessary. The easiest way is to do what Hannah just did, read the sentence without the word or phrase. If nothing seems to change, if it does not seem to change the meaning, that's unnecessary, and we want both of those commas, one before and one after. Now, sometimes it is going to change the meaning. So take a look at 7 here. Carly, again, we're going to start with the same question every time. What do you notice changing in the answer choices?
The commas.
Yes, and Carly, specifically around what word or phrase?
Of vertically arranged dots.
So this time I'm going to read the sentence. And again, I'm going to do the same thing Hannah did. I'm just going to ignore that phrase, and you tell me whether it still makes sense or not. As early as the 5th century BCE, the Greeks were sometimes using punctuation marks called dicolons and tricolons to help with the oral transmission of their texts. The number told speakers the appropriate length of pauses. What do we think about that? Did the sentence still make sense if I just got rid of that prepositional phrase? Carly says hesitantly yes. Bartus seems like no. Carly, let me ask you this question. If we ignore this phrase, what's the number referring to? Do we know what the number means? The number of what?
Not really.
That's exactly right. The problem here is that if we get rid of that prepositional phrase, I don't know what number they're talking about. Are they talking about the number of texts? I mean, that was the closest noun in the previous sentence, right? Are they talking about the number of speakers? Are they talking about the number of punctuation marks overall? Obviously, because we've read the sentence with the phrase, we know what they mean is the number of the vertically arranged dots. But if we had deleted that phrase, we would not have that information. And so deleting it in this case does change the meaning of the sentence. And what that tells me is that I do not want to separate out that phrase with commas. We don't separate out necessary information with commas. We just leave it as it is, which in this case means that the best choice is A. We don't want to use commas when the information is necessary. We only want to use the commas when the information is unnecessary. Make sense? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Okay. Let's see. Hannah, what do you notice changing in the answer choices on number 8?
Punctuation.
Yes, absolutely. And specifically what punctuation?
Commas.
Yes, very good. So I can see several different commas. I've got one after syllables, one after thus, one after and, one after than. In the sentence itself, I have the one before and the one after thus. So there's clearly a lot going on here. And then I have D, an answer choice with no commas whatsoever. Well, there's one choice I can already see right away I can get rid of. Do you guys know which one that is? What's the thing that I basically never ever want in terms of commas?
None of them.
No, I might want none of them. That could be okay, but I like the confidence, Carly. And comma, right? Again, and comma, almost always bad. I can't think of a time I've ever seen it on a correct answer choice. And so I'm already very suspicious. I'm getting rid of C. I don't think it's going to be C. But for these others, I'm going to read the sentence with the commas, and I'm just going to kind of exaggerate the pause. And you tell me whether or not it seems like we actually need all these different pauses. So the sentence as it is would sound like this. Some other languages, like early Chinese and Mayan, worked in pictograms or syllables rather than individual letters, and thus had no need for punctuation at all. So I actually missed that comma there. Does it seem like we need those pauses? No, I'm seeing some head nods no. And so here's when I would start to think through, well, what are my rules, right? Am I separating any complete ideas? No. Am I trying to connect incomplete ideas? No. Are these items in a list that I want the commas after? No. Is this information unnecessary? Is there some part of the sentence we could actually just cut out of the sentence and it wouldn't matter? No. And so none of the rules apply in this case. And whenever that happens, whenever you can't think of a rule that would justify the use of a comma, don't use the comma. In this case, D actually is the best choice because none of our rules would apply here. We don't need a comma in any of these situations. And so that's why I would cross off A, B, and C and go with D. So yeah, you can see the 4 reasons to use commas on the SAT. And again, this would apply just as much on the ACT. If you can't cite one of these reasons, then don't use a comma. Look for an answer choice that does not have the comma at all. Let's move on from the comma and let's talk about apostrophes. So in English, apostrophes are used for 2 things. Either, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Either possession or contraction. And that's it. Those are the only 2 valid reasons to use apostrophes. Either we're trying to combine 2 words like it's into it is, or you know, the dogs going to the park. In that case, we mean dog is, right? So either I'm basically getting rid of letters, and in that case, it's what we call contraction, or I'm indicating some kind of ownership or possession. Outside of that, I should not be using apostrophes. So take a look at number 9. And again, first things first, bar 2, what do you notice changing in the answer choices on number 9?
The apostrophes.
Yes, specifically where?
After authors and printers, or author and printer.
Good. Anywhere else?
And there.
Yeah, we've got there, the pronoun, versus their, the contraction, right? So let's see if we can figure out what's going on here. With the introduction of the printing press, authors and printers began to standardize the conventions of written English in their texts. So Hannah, let's start with the contraction thing. Are we trying to say, with the introduction of the printing press, author is and printer is began to standardize the conventions? Does that make sense, Hannah?
No.
No. Do the authors and printers own the idea of beginning to standardize conventions?
Yes. No.
Are you sure? Yeah, I don't think so. And so right away, I'm super suspicious of those particular apostrophes. And so I'm thinking A is no good, and I'm thinking C is no good. Now, Hannah, what about there versus there at the end? The authors and printers begin to standardize the conventions of written English in they are texts?
No.
No. And so I'm going to get rid of D, and the only thing left is B. So in this case, I didn't need any of the apostrophes because the authors and printers don't own anything. And there is a possessive pronoun. We don't need apostrophes for possessive pronouns. And so in that case, B ends up being the best choice. Let's practice a few of these. Again, I'll just go down my list. Bar 2, I want to try to replace a word or phrase in that sentence using an apostrophe. So instead of saying the theme of the essay, we could say the blank theme. What would you say, Bar 2?
The essay's theme.
Very good. And where would you put the apostrophe?
Yeah, right there after the Y.
Yes, very good. So in this case, the essay is in a sense owning the theme, right? But that's what the apostrophe is doing there. Carly, what about this next one? The main point Sarah is making. How would you use an apostrophe to replace some of the words or phrases there?
In Sarah,
Yeah, so where would you put it?
SARAH apostrophe S, like.
Yes, yeah, very good. Sarah's main point. And again, in this case, it's ownership, right? Sarah, in a sense, owns the main point. Hannah, what about the third one here? The findings of the authors. How could we rewrite that?
Finding of the authors. Authors. Well.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the author's findings.
Now, the only difference here is authors is plural. So Hannah, do you remember where we want to put the apostrophe when our noun is plural?
After this.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Now, I kind of made a mistake when I said that. We put the apostrophe after the S for a plural noun if it's a plural noun that ends in S, which obviously authors does. But take a look at this next one, the favorite writer of the people. Now, probably you're each thinking, oh, easy enough, right? That's the people's favorite writer. But of course, people is already plural. It does not end in S. And so in that case, we do actually put the apostrophe before the S, just like we do for singular nouns. So basically, the only time you want the apostrophe after the S is if it's a plural noun that already or does end in S. All right, let's go on to number 10 here. Carly, I think we're back to you. What do you see changing in the answer choices?
The apostrophe
Specifically where?
over printers and intentions.
Okay, so again, we're going to think through, do we need possession here? Do we need contractions? With the Bible in particular, the printer's intentions were clear. These texts were meant to be preached, so the preachers would need clear indications of where to pause and how long to do so. Well, first of all, do the printers own the intentions in the sense? Is this like a possession situation?
Yes.
Bartu is saying yes. Carly says yes. Yeah, very good. So I do want that first apostrophe, meaning I can already get rid of B, right? Because B doesn't have that first apostrophe. Do the intentions own anything? Carly says no. Yeah. And so I already don't like C or D. And of course, if we tried to do the contraction thing, it also wouldn't work, right? The printer's intention were clear, clearly is no good, right? So one thing that's nice about this is that we can get to A without actually having to figure out the difference between C and D. Like you'll notice in C, printer is singular, whereas in D, printers are plural. And it's not super clear which one is to be preferred just from the sentence. And so anytime that happens, there must be something else in the sentence that tells you, whether to expect printer to be singular or printers to be plural. But again, process of elimination kind of saved us here. We didn't need that. All right, a few other notes. Like I mentioned a second ago, there are possessive pronouns that indicate possession without using apostrophes. In fact, basically, if I see a pronoun followed by an apostrophe, it is always a contraction. It's never going to indicate possession. Clearly, the place where this comes up most is in its versus its. So its with no apostrophe always indicates possession. Its ball, its book, something like that. It apostrophe s always indicates the contraction it is. And then one thing to note, this does occasionally come up. Its apostrophe. Any idea what on earth its apostrophe is supposed to mean?
Like the possession of it.
But like when we have s followed by apostrophe, what's usually going on? Something must be.
Like it apostrophe s.
Well, I wish it were it apostrophe s because that would be good. But I mean, if we have s followed by an apostrophe, that's usually because something's supposed to be plural, right?
Yes.
But Carly, I can tell you're a little confused. Can it be a plural pronoun?
No.
No, this does not exist in English. If you ever see its apostrophe on the SAT or the ACT, get rid of it. It's a trap. Let's go ahead and skip that a little bit. Let's just look at 11 here. This is the last question. And part 2, I think we're back to you. What's changing in the answer choices on number 11?
The apostrophes after squiggle, writers, and there.
Very good. Okay, so let's go through these one at a time. These indicators eventually became the punctuation marks that we use today. And it's because, does the it own something there? Or are we trying to say, and it is because?
It is.
Yes, very good. So I'm already getting rid of B. I don't want the it to own anything. It's because of these little squiggle is that writers. Does that sound right, Hannah? Squiggle is that writers can share? Hannah says no. So I don't like C, and the squiggles don't own anything. And then Carly, are we trying to say that writers can share their words, like the words they own, or that writers can share they are words?
The words that they own.
Yes, very good. So D is out and A is the best choice. And again, you'll notice those last couple that we did, I think, ended up being A. Remember, A is correct a fourth of the time. Don't be afraid to select answer choice A. If we have a good reason to get rid of B, C, and D, A is the best choice. All right, any questions on those various reasons to use commas, apostrophes, periods, semicolons, etc.? All right, here's what I want y'all to do. And you may need to get your phone out to do this. I'm going to have you do a drill right now with 11 questions. And so obviously you need to take like a picture of the screen or something. I don't know how you want to do that, but I'll leave 1, 2, and 3 up here for a second. So grab your phone or iPad, take a picture. And then once I get the thumbs up from all 3 of you, I'll scroll down to the next set. Carly says she has it, bar 2. Hannah, you let me know when you get it. If you could take a screenshot. Oh, Hannah says she has it. Okay. And then there's one more question on that page. So number 4 there. Thumbs up, thumbs down. We got it. Yes, Hannah says yes. Okay. And then we have a couple questions here, 5 through 7. Part two says yes. Hannah says yes. Carly? Yes. Okay. And then as again, two more questions this time, 8 and 9 there. Okay. And then the last two questions here, 10 and 11. Okay, Hannah. Got it. Okay. So I'm going to time us. Now the timer says 6 minutes. We might take 6 or 7 minutes. But again, your pacing is pretty fast on these passages. And so 6 minutes would roughly be the timing you want to aim for to finish the section, which as we've discussed is what your goal should be. But again, for today, this is the first time we're doing it. We might take 6 or 7 minutes. And so I'm just going to mute myself and then stop y'all after about 6 or 7 minutes. Give me a thumbs up if you're ready to go. Okay, very good. You may begin. All right, go ahead and stop your work. Like I said, that was just about 7 minutes. Let me go ahead and give you the answers, and then I'll take any questions you have. Number 1 is B, 2A, 3D, 4D. On the next page, 5 was C, 6A, 7A, and then 8C, and 9B. And then finally, the last 2 questions, 10D and 11D. So take a second, take a look at any you missed. And then let me know what you'd like to look at.
Can you do 1 through 5 again?
The answers?
Yes, sorry.
It's all right. 1 was B, 2A, 3D, 4D, and 5C. So again, any questions, any misses, anything we're not really sure? Why is blank the answer? No? Okay, so we're good. Thumbs up. We want to move on. All right, great. Well, there's writing. I think I mentioned this last week. At this point, we've seen all the major sections, and we have an idea of at least a basic approach to each of the major sections. So we could stop tonight, and a couple weeks from now, when y'all take the PSAT, you know, you have many, many tools that you need to do well. Now, we're not going to stop tonight. Sorry to disappoint you. We are going to go, I think we got 2 more Wednesdays where we're going to meet, and then you take the PSAT on the 13th. I haven't communicated with your parents yet, so I don't know if would they want you to have the night off. That's what I would do, but I'm not a parent to a junior in high school, so I don't know. But in any case, again, you should feel good. We've seen all the major sections. We are going to see at least 1 more of each section, and obviously we have some time tonight, so I actually want to jump down to another math section. So again, in that PDF I sent you, this is page 165, and we've got about 15 minutes, so we'll finish up here tonight. I don't think we'll finish this lesson, but we'll at least get into it. And to switch gears a little bit, you may remember when we looked at math several weeks ago, we had, of course, our introduction to the section and some overall strategies like taking the questions in bite-sized pieces, making sure to try to use our calculator where appropriate and with parentheses and stuff to make sure that we don't make any mistakes as we plug numbers in. Always RTFQ reading the full question. But then we went into plugging in, which was this strategy we use when we see variables in the answer choices. Now, there's a question here, and it does have variables in the answer choices. You can see number 6 right here. In fact, Hannah, why don't you read that for us?
Gibbs free energy G is the thermodynamic quantity that is equal to the enthalpy of a system minus the product of the entropy and the absolute temperature. The equation G equals U plus PV minus TS illustrates how internal energy U, pressure P, volume V, temperature T, and entropy S are all used to determine Gibbs free energy. Which of the following expressions best describes how to find the absolute temperature T that is necessary for a given system?
So that was a mouthful, right? Thank you, Hannah, for reading that. As I look at the answer choices, again, I do see variables. And technically speaking, I could do a version of plugging in here. I could pick some internal energy, pressure, volume, temperature, and entropy, plug them all in, solve for, whatever this quantity G is, Gibbs free energy, and then go to the answer choices and figure out, okay, when I plug in those same numbers, which one gives me back the right value for temperature? Why might I not want to do that here? Even though I could, why might that not be the best idea? Carly, any idea?
It would take a lot of time.
Yeah, there are, what, 6 variables here? So it's one thing to plug in when we have 1 or 2 variables, but if we have 6 variables, it might be better if we can just do the math, so to speak. So that's what this lesson is all about. The fundamentals lesson is all about, well, yes, we might have strategies we want to apply, but sometimes it's better to just be able to solve a system of equations or graph a parabola or evaluate a function or whatever it might be that they ask us. And so we just want to look at, what do we do in a scenario like this? Like here, they want us to solve for t, right? Yeah, which of the following expressions best describes how to find temperature T? So if I have G equals U plus PV minus TS, the first thing that's bothering me is that the T is negative, and I obviously don't want it to be negative. So Bartu, do you have an idea? What could we do with that minus TS to start manipulating this equation?
Multiply by -1.
That's interesting. I could do that. Is there something we could do instead to just move it to the other side?
Yeah.
What could we do?
You move t to the other side by adding it, and then
Yes.
g will be negative if you move to that side.
Good. That's exactly right. So I get G plus TS equals U plus PV. And then as Bartu said, my next step would be to move that G over to the other side, which would make it negative. So now I have TS equals U plus PV minus G. And now I'm almost to the stage where the T is by itself. But Hannah, what's preventing the T from being totally by itself?
The fact that S is still there is you need to divide S by both sides.
Very good. To undo T times S, I want to divide everything by S now. And so that's how I get this expression, T equals U plus PV minus G over S. And that's answer choice D, right? Happens to be exactly what answer choice D is. Like Carly observed, although we probably could plug in here, it's way faster if we can just actually solve for T. And so again, that's what we're going to look at for the next few minutes. What do questions look like when maybe we could apply some strategy like plugging in, but also it might be better to just actually solve it outright. Inequalities are a great example of this. Inequalities sometimes kind of frustrate our plugging in process because of course there are lots of numbers that could possibly work. And so when we want to solve an inequality outright, we just want to remember that there's one special way that inequalities are different from equations. Anywhere that we multiply or divide by a negative number, we have to flip our inequality sign around. So greater than becomes less than becomes greater than. Like this example number 8. So this is called a compound inequality. We've got 2 boundaries on either side. 13 is less than or equal to 31 minus 2x is less than or equal to 39. And we're trying to isolate x. Well, Carly, obviously x is not by itself. Working from inside out, what do you want to manipulate first?
The 31.
Great. So it's a positive 31, meaning we need to do what?
Subtract 31 on both sides, or all sides.
Excellent. All sides, yeah. So 13 minus 31 is negative 18, I think. Less than or equal to negative 2x, less than or equal to 8. Now, I haven't changed any of my signs yet because subtracting a number is fine. You don't have to change your signs when you subtract a number. It's only if we multiply or divide by a number that we have to change our signs. Well, Hannah, again, the x is not by itself. What's your next step? How are we going to get the x by itself here?
You have to. We have to divide, but I don't know.
Yep.
Oh yeah, actually, I know too.
Yeah, we have to divide by the -2. And because it's -2, I'm also going to change my signs. And so you can see a less than becomes a greater than. From there, of course, I also want to be careful about canceling anything, like -18 over -2 is +9, right? X obviously is by itself. That was Hannah's idea, to get rid of the -2 by dividing. And then 8 over -2 is -4. And you can see there's one other wrinkle as we go into the answer choices. Is there an answer choice that looks exactly like what we've written? Carly's already saying no, because they changed all the signs back to the other direction, right? So we just have to make sure that as we rotate this, we again remember to rotate the signs. And so this would be the same thing as -4 is less than or equal to X is less than or equal to +9. Of course, the other thing you could do here is simply look at the boundaries, and the only boundaries that have a +9 and a -4 is answer choice B. And so really we could probably get away without understanding this here, but that is why B ends up being the best choice. And then there's strange questions like 23 here. Which of the following accurately defines all possible values of P minus Q if 15 is less than or equal to P is less than or equal to 30 and 7 is less than or equal to Q is less than or equal to 19? Well, if I'm thinking to myself, oh, I want to subtract P minus Q, I might think, let's just line this up and subtract down, right? So bar 2, what's 15 minus 7?
8.
And 30 minus 19?
11.
And so I might think, well, that wasn't too hard. Answer choice C is the best choice, right? But notice what happens if I do pick some actual numbers here. Carly, can you pick a pretty large value for P?
25.
Perfect. Hannah, can you pick a kind of small value for Q?
2.
Well, can it be as small as 2?
Oh wait, no, that was dumb.
It's not
8.
dumb, but something a little bigger than 7. Yeah, 8, perfect. 25 minus 8 is 17. Is 17 in the range we selected right now? Carly says no. So we've made a mistake, right? And the problem is, remember, when we're subtracting, that's essentially like multiplying everything by a -1. So if we actually multiply everything in this inequality by a -1, yes, we have a -7, but it's greater than or equal to Q. Yes, we have a -19, but again, Q is greater than or equal to that. And so when we rearrange this, when we line this up again, this time with our -Q in the middle there, we get -19 is less than or equal to -Q is less than or equal to -7. Or basically the same intuition that Carly and Hannah were using. The largest possible P with the smallest possible Q would give us something around 23 as a possible result here. And on the opposite end, the smallest possible P and the largest possible Q, when we subtract, would give us a result of -4. And so that's why A actually ends up being the right answer here rather than C. And so again, the main idea here is anytime you see an inequality with minus signs, you just want to be really careful, because inequalities don't work like equations. With an equal sign, who cares, right? Equal signs work both directions. 3 equals X is the same as saying X equals 3. But with inequalities, that doesn't end up being true. And it's multiplying or dividing by a negative that kind of exposes that. And so again, anytime I see an inequality and a minus sign, I'm just being really careful to flip my inequality signs around. All right. Do I want to do this right now? Yeah, let's go ahead and do this. We'll finish up here. This will be our last question. Number 11. What is the sum of the distinct possible values of x for the equation x squared plus 3x minus 10 equals 0? So again, you can probably tell in the way that they're phrasing this that they're kind of frustrating our attempts to plug in. If they just said, what is a possible value of x? All we would have to do is pick an answer, plug it in, and if it works, we're done. That's the answer, right? But because they've said, what is the sum of the possible values of x? Now all of a sudden I have a problem. Like if I think the answer is D and I just want to try it out, lots of numbers add up to 5, right? X could be 1 and 4. It could be 0 and 5. It could be 2 and 3. For that matter, it could be even be some negative numbers. It could be like -2 and +7. And so even if I wanted to try out D by plugging in the answers like we sometimes do, there's really not a good way to figure out what are those possible distinct values of x. And so again, this is a kind of question where it's much better if we can just actually solve the quadratic. Now, you probably are aware of this thing called the quadratic formula. Who has a song for the quadratic formula? Now I know Hannah does, that's right, because I taught Hannah the song. All right, Carly and Bartu, you get to hear my dulcet tones right now. I'm going to sing you my quadratic formula song. X is equal to -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So Bartu's smiling like maybe you did know that song, Bartu. That's how Bartu says no. That's how I remember the quadratic formula. I literally sing the song in my head every time. I don't remember it otherwise. And for certain kinds of quadratics, we can only use the quadratic formula. And so that's how we would solve the quadratic. Fortunately, we have another option here. And I think I sent y'all a video a few weeks ago of me factoring with the box method. And again, I know Hannah learned the box method because I taught it to her years ago. But there are lots of different ways to factor. You don't have to use the box method. In fact, I'm guessing you probably, especially on a quadratic this simple, this is called a monic quadratic because the x squared is by itself. It's not 2x squared or 7x squared, it's just x squared. We can actually just ask this simple question. What two numbers multiply up to -10, but add up to +3? So Carly, I'm going to pick on you. Can you give me two numbers that multiply up to -10, but add up to +3?
5 and -2.
Very good. And so this quadratic factors as x plus 5, x minus 2. Now there's one other step. Remember, we are trying to make this, equal to 0. Well, if x plus 5 is 0, what does that make x?
-5.
Yes. And if x minus 2 is 0, that makes x +2, right? Now you'll notice, well, actually I was going to say you'll notice these are traps, but in fact, they have a -2 and a +5, the values Carly gave us, but they don't have the opposites. So I guess that's a little nice of them. The trap isn't as bad as it could be. But even then, they didn't want the individual values. They said they wanted the sum of these values. Well, obviously, -5 plus 2 is -3. And so answer choice A ends up being the best choice here. I'll try to remember where we left off because there's actually an interesting little trick for this kind of question. There are lots of questions that ask about the sum or the product of the solutions or the roots. And I guess I'll have you do it for me right now. Hannah, what is -5 times 2?
-10.
Yes. And Hannah, did you notice a -10 anywhere else in the question?
Yes.
Yes. This is not a coincidence. That third value in a trinomial, the constant at the end, is always related to the product of the roots. For that matter, you can probably tell, oh, that's interesting. There was a +3 in the middle of the trinomial, and the answer ended up being -3. Again, that's not just a coincidence. The middle number always ends up being related to the sum of the roots. So if I gave you just like a random quadratic, 2x squared minus 11x plus 18, there would actually be a very simple way for you to tell me the product and the sum of the roots without actually having to solve this at all. But we've hit our time for the night, so I'm going to leave a cliffhanger for you. We'll pick up there next Wednesday, and we'll talk about what that special little method is. You can already see it here in the margin, but I'll explain a little bit more about it next Wednesday. For tonight, we are all done. I will upload the video and send out an email as always. Y'all can move on to any of the writing and fundamentals work. The fundamentals work is in your math workbook. The writing passages are in your verbal workbook. And again, I sent out a practice test. And so if you haven't already taken that, I would strongly recommend setting aside some time, maybe this weekend, and getting that practice test done. If you have completed it and you would like me to score it for you, I'm happy to do that. I'll put a score together and then I'll send a few thoughts along with that score. But otherwise, yeah, we're all done. You guys have a good night. I will see you next Wednesday.